I found myself paralyzed in any kind of decision that I wanted to make. And so I would just take a poll of all of my friends, all of my family, all of my trusted
Yeah.
advisors. And, not that it's not good to seek feedback, but this was my default for everything. I'm like, okay, well, 10 people said that I should do this and five said I should do this. So I'll go with the 10. And whether or not that was the right aligned decision for me, I just went with it because I'm like, well, that's what the majority of people said. Women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression as opposed to men. Um, and that all kind of, and I'm not saying that there aren't other causes for those conditions because we're all different, but those conditions,
Yeah.
having these conditions are, what's the word I'm looking for? Amplified by things like perfectionism and people pleasing and suppressing your own personal autonomy and truth and who you really want to be.
On today's episode of Empowered in Health, I have my good friend Kara here today, and I am so excited to have just an awesome conversation about female health, disconnection, this idea of like trying to meet the expectations we've set forth for ourselves or that have been put on ourselves, and what that can really look like in our wellness journey if we're not careful to be more intentional with unpacking that and so much more. So, Kara, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for our chat.
Yeah, for sure. I am too.
It's going to be good, my friend. I would love to kind of dive in and start a little bit with talking about the cost of disconnection for women. I know you are a transformation coach. You help women with kind of getting in tune with their physiology, with how to work with their natural flow and rhythms, more or less. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your upbringing and looking back to, some of this idea of disconnection and how you had received a lot of messaging about perfection and people pleasing and all of those things. How did that essentially shape you? And what have you learned along the way related to how you potentially got disconnected from yourself because of some of those things that you learned in your upbringing?
Yeah, so I feel like this is not unique to me, but it's very common for women in general. But just to give you a little snippet of how I grew up in a very conservative, religious household, had a great childhood for the most part, nothing, no major complaints. But one of the things that came as a result of that was just this overall sense that I couldn't trust my body, I couldn't trust my intuition, my body was sinful, I couldn't trust my emotions. Like it was just an overall message that others in authority knew better than me and that I had no business making any sort of decisions about what I thought was good for me, let alone like things in my future. And so you know, as a kid, that doesn't, you don't really think about that because that's your formative years. You kind of do what your parents tell you and all that jazz. And that was all fine. But by the time I got to college, became a young adult, started working in the real world, that really became problematic for me because I found myself paralyzed in any kind of decision that I wanted to make. And so what I ended up doing was I had this whole method where I would, if I had a major decision or even a small decision, and I would get overwhelmed and obsess about it, I would just take a poll of all of my friends, all of my family, all of my trusted
Yeah.
advisors. And, not that it's not good to seek feedback, but this was my default for everything. I'm like, okay, well, 10 people said that I should do this and five said I should do this. So I'll go with the 10. And whether or not that was the right aligned decision for me, I just went with it because I'm like, well, that's what the majority of people said. And so it's like, I
Right.
always use this whole phone a friend method. That was where this really came to a head for me was, like I said, I was working full time. I started to date a guy that I met at work. And there was a lot of angst and just like turmoil around the beginning of our relationship. But then what I realized as we were going through this together, as we were getting to know one another, I couldn't say that there was just this aha moment, but eventually I just realized I'm like, I was raised to make good decisions, be a good person, know how to think through things, intelligent. Like I knew what I was doing. I was raised this way, and yet everybody in my life thought that I couldn't make this decision for myself. And so finally one day I
Yeah.
just decided I'm like, well, this is who I want to date. And we eventually got married and all of the things that were a problem are no longer a problem. They've worked themselves out, but that's kind of how it all came to a head. I just kind of faced something that my family of origin didn't necessarily feel was in alignment for what their plan was for my life and went for it. And it
Right.
felt good and it felt content. It felt peaceful and it felt aligned.
Yeah. I love how you just really kind of started to give yourself permission to kind of step into making the decisions for yourself and like trusting your intuition and trusting who you are and how you wanted your life to look like. And I think so often, especially as women, we all have some level of that narrative of somebody somewhere along the way dictated how they wanted our lives to look or how we should show up or how we should work or what success looks like or whatever it is. And when we have those soundtracks kind of overpowering what we're thinking or how we're making decisions, it can be really overwhelming to try to figure out, well, but what do I want? And what is my brain telling me? And how do I really get connected to what feels like my intuition and my dream for my life? So, Kara, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what you really feel like women lose, maybe mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, when they're disconnected from themselves and they are kind of stuck in those soundtracks of, leaning into what maybe other people dreamed up for their life and it's not necessarily aligning the same way. What are women losing?
I knew what I was experiencing in myself, but of course, being the, taking polls, doing the research, I wanted to find some data to support this. And I mean, it's not surprising, but it was still really affirming in a way that when I found some of these statistics that basically confirmed my experience. So, for example, women are 3 times as likely to be underdiagnosed with ADHD as opposed to men. The reason for that is because women routinely mask whatever it is that they're experiencing in order to get through to play the role that they were taught to play or whatever they were
Yeah.
conditioned to believe and how to be. Um, Women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression as opposed to men. Um, and that all kind of, and I'm not saying that there aren't other causes for those conditions because we're all different, but those conditions,
Yeah.
having these conditions are, what's the word I'm looking for? Amplified by things like perfectionism and people pleasing and suppressing your own personal autonomy and truth and who you really want to be. And so
Yeah.
it's not just like it's not just relational, but it's like energetic, it's physical, it's all of the things about ourselves. And the cost, I think, is not it prevents us from doing all kinds of things like setting healthy boundaries, from going after what we really want or need, for that matter, for even being able to identify what that looks like. Because I think a lot of women are just like, well, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I need. They're so used to looking outward. Like when somebody asks you that question, it's not an automatic, it's not automatic for most of us to be able to answer that. And
Yeah.
so, on the contrary, when we are in tune with ourselves, when we are connected, it feels like we are suddenly able to see possibilities and be more creative and resilient and be able to become the people that we want. And that's not just a benefit to women. That's, I truly believe, a benefit to everybody, the people they're in relationship with, the world, their kids, their family, their coworkers. So yeah, I think that the cost is pretty huge.
Yeah, it is huge. And I love that you're just speaking to this, not only through sharing your story, but it's clear you have this big passion as a coach to really help women start to identify this and figure out, if you feel disconnected from yourself or if you're living out of alignment in some way, what are the steps you can take to start to get to a place of being grounded in what you really are craving or what you really desire for your life. So, Kara, I'd love for you to talk to the person that's listening to this that might not realize that they're out of alignment. So, what are some common signs where you have identified yourself, or maybe you've identified with women you've talked to or friends you've talked to that come up that really do indicate, yeah, you know what, I'm not really living in my like natural rhythm, my natural flow. I'm out of alignment. Like, what are those kinds of signs and what do they look like?
Yeah. So at the core, I think these signs show up in our bodies like as emotion. And again, like I said, I think we've been conditioned to kind of suppress our emotions and to, go along to get along. And so we don't always pay attention. But for the most part, I'll speak for myself and for how this has showed up in other women that I've worked with. But just through, it could be a sense of angst or unease. So this underlying like frantic angst really. And so kind of it becomes this version of like feeling always behind, never ahead, never at the right place, never fully present where you are. Um, and so that's one sign. I think another sign is the flip, like maybe having no emotion and feeling like just this dull sense of like,
Yeah.
meh, okay, I have all these things in my life and I'm grateful for them. I should be grateful, but I kind of feel blah. Like I kind of feel like there's something missing. Like everything feels like trudging through the mud. Like I can barely make myself get through the day. And so
Yeah.
those two opposite ends of the spectrum, and then combine that with starting to look externally instead of internally, because if you don't know yourself and you don't know how to know yourself, it's natural to just look outside of yourself. Particularly for
Yeah.
the high achieving good girl who grew up in a, maybe a stricter upbringing, and who was conditioned to follow everybody else's rules. Like it's normal to look outside yourself. And so, but at the core of all that, I think it just shows up, like that disconnection for women shows up in emotion in our bodies.
100%. So we've talked about kind of the cost. We've talked about some of the signs and what kind of happens when you're living in this place of disconnection. Can you move and talk a little bit about like what are the tools now? Like what are the practices? How do you start to actually reconnect with yourself? What does that look like when you're doing this work in your own life but also doing this work with other women?
I think that just having the overall knowledge from the get go of why women are disconnected is huge. And the reason I think that is because I feel like we, as women, we kind of go through our days and we wonder, why are we struggling so much? Why is this so hard? Why does it feel like I'm just like treading water, barely keeping my head above water? And I think that we don't always recognize or aren't always aware that historically, in all areas of our lives, like physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, in all of these areas, there have been historic events that have happened through like before our lifetimes that have caused women to be suppressed or to not trust their bodies. I mean, here's an example, and this is something I know that you're passionate about with women's health in particular. The research on women's health, particularly like hormone health, we didn't start studying that really in great detail or have any meaningful research around that until the last decade or so. And so up until then,
Yeah.
men, the research was done on men and lab rats and mice, and so that's how we were getting our health care. And along those same lines, emotionally and spiritually, women used to be taught to, there used to be like medicine women and women who were taught to trust their intuition and their inner knowing. But then that was demonized as witchcraft. And, witches were burnt, these witches were burned
Yeah.
at the stake. And all of this instinctual feminine knowledge was lost and replaced with a patriarchal
Yeah.
structure, for how things should run in the world. And that just kind of, um,
Yeah.
what's the word I'm looking for? That just kind of perpetuated itself in the world of work. Like under the Equal Pay Act, we're still, even though we've made progress in that with, over time, the workday is still set up 9 to 5 based on a masculine
Yep.
energy level, based on the circadian rhythm. Like I was talking about the Equal Pay Act, we have made strides, but women are still paid less than men dollar for dollar. And so I
Yeah.
say all that not to discourage women, but to just paint the picture that it's not your fault for not trying hard enough. It's not your fault that you, didn't do enough, or maybe you don't think you have the skills to overcome it or the mental wherewithal or whatever. It quite literally is because the deck has been stacked against you historically, like in
Yeah.
all of these ways. And so I think that's the first step, is just knowing it. Like, yes, it should make you
Yeah.
angry, but also it should be kind of like a breath of fresh air, because now you're like, okay, well, now I can do something with this. Now I feel empowered to make a step. And so
Yeah.
to answer the other part of your question about what can we practically do from there to just get back into flow and to find that reconnection, I think it's two things. I think it's first just simply knowing who you want to become. And like I said, I know that I think is hard for women. We're like, I don't know who
Yeah.
I want to become. I don't know what I want. But it's really a simple exercise to just journal for 5 minutes and write down all of the
Yeah.
things, the top 10 things of the kind of person, the kind of woman that you want to become. Like it's really that simple as putting it into words, and then you can work backwards from there as far as what that takes to achieve. Secondly, I think that we when we're out of flow, we are we're getting caught up in the expression of what our history and our culture and all of the things that we didn't have control over. We're getting caught up in the outcome of that. And so for the high achieving good girl, that looks like perfectionism. It looks like the inner critic. It looks like overwhelm, decision paralysis, time blindness, like mental clutter and looping, not being able to close the loop on things and move forward because you're obsessing over the thing. So I think that's tangibly how it shows up. And so from there, I can't remember what you asked me now about like what the next. I think you asked me what the next steps were to deal with that, which I can talk to you about, but now I'm losing the plot.
Oh gosh, no worries. I just wanted you to kind of share more about the tools, like the practices, which you did. You talked about journaling, you talked about, self-awareness, really kind of painting the picture of where you want to go, who you want to be, and kind of reverse engineering from there. And I think, when we're talking about topics like this and we're talking about our experiences and what we've learned along the way and like the things we've been conditioned into, it's so helpful for other women to hear, well, this is what I've worked on in my life, and these are the tangible tips, tricks, tools I've started to implement and use that have helped me break down these walls or break through these expectations, or have helped me shift into really being aligned to what feels good to me. And so I really appreciate you kind of sharing what you've done and really what you're doing and the work you're doing, Kara, because it's something that I know women will resonate with. And I know even for me, as you're sharing, like I can pinpoint things that have cropped up for me that I've been conditioned into, that I've been made to believe is what I need to do in my life or what I'm supposed to do in my life. And I think the more we can normalize that that's not something we have to execute on if it doesn't feel aligned, that's really profound for women to hear.
Yeah, like I said, just the knowing is the first step. The knowing of what has happened, the knowing of who you want to be, and then practically speaking, if I could just give a couple practical, quick, tangible tips. Earlier, I referenced that what being disconnected or out of flow looks like is just this like angst and this like inner turmoil. I think that what we often don't do is take time to take a breath, pause, and
Yeah.
operate from a regulated nervous system before we decide what the next step is.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, very simply, um, stopping to do some box breathing, like 4 4 4 4, saying out loud what the thing is. Like, so I'm not even talking about getting wrapped up in the overwhelm or the emotion or the story you're telling yourself, but simply, secondly, saying out loud, this thing happened. I was 10 minutes late for this thing. I scrolled Instagram for an hour. Those are factual things. They don't mean anything about who you are.
Yep.
Thing happened. So from there, you're signaling to your body, like, okay, this is fine. This happened. Now you can start to, you know, express, okay, this made me feel overwhelmed. Okay, fine. The story I'm telling myself is I'm a failure. And, as you say these things out loud and start to flip them, it becomes easier to feel calm. And then from there, you're able to take just a small micro step back into momentum, putting one dish away, clearing the clutter for 10 minutes while a song plays, like very small things to help you get back into momentum. And so I think that really
Yeah.
is the key. Like women don't struggle with motivation. Like we're all motivated to do a lot of great things. We just struggle with momentum and we don't give ourselves that pause. Like literally what I described could take like less than 5 minutes, and it's so critical to taking an aligned step.
Yeah, I love that you're speaking on momentum, or this idea of like, what are the small, simple things you can do to start to let the energy compound into where you want to go or what you want to change or what you're trying to accomplish. And so I love that you're speaking on that and really normalizing kind of how that can look in baby steps. Because for women, and I know for me and for the clients I work with, and you and I have talked about this, Kara, like it can become this huge mountain in our brains, and we don't necessarily always take forward action because we are compiling it all in our heads and we don't know exactly what it's going to look like and we don't know where to start. But when you actually take it out of your brain and put it down on a piece of paper, or like you said, take that pause, like get into your body, breathe, and then figure out what are the small things you can do to move into momentum, like that's what can create the change. And that's what allows you to really get into feeling aligned in the work you're doing or the way you're showing up daily. And I just appreciate you continuing to kind of share that, because it's so important for women to continue to hear, like we've already talked about. I know as a transformation coach, you have a program called Fulfill Flow, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that is. We've talked a lot about disconnection and, the signs and what the cost is of being disconnected. What are the practical tips and tricks and tools you can implement in order to kind of get more aligned with yourself? But talk a little bit more about your program and the work you do as a coach.
So this whole program, Fulfilled Flow, quite literally came out of, I mean, I want to say 40 plus years of living, but whenever I started thinking about um, how I go through my life, I started noticing patterns. And so I'll describe it like this. So if you've ever been whitewater rafting, there are what's called undercut rocks. So if your boat's going along, everything's fine. But if it gets stuck against a rock, an undercut rock, um, where the water has eroded it and there's this ledge, it could suck you under into this cycle. And so what I was finding with myself was that I would get stuck in these cycles, like the cycles I described of perfectionism, the inner critic, all of those flow blockers that I now call them. And so what that is in real life is life or death. Like you literally could die from that. But for women, I mean, how often do you hear women say, like, oh, I'm barely keeping my head above water. Oh, I feel like I'm drowning over here. Like, that's what's happening because we're letting ourselves be sucked into this churn over and over and over again. And so it was from that point of pain where I realized I'm like, okay, you know, I need to start doing something. And so for me, it started with taking care of my physical health and then hormone health. And then it just snowballed from there into a whole system where um, there are, I don't know that I want to call the 5 steps sequential or independent of one another, but there are 5 steps where we've talked about some of this throughout this interview today, but the first major pillar is just knowing yourself, knowing who you want to be, who you want to become, who you are, and there are systems to do that. Also, in that pillar, there are systems that help you identify from time to time, where are my areas of disconnection? Where can I gain that awareness? So the women who are living in fulfilled flow, they first and foremost know themselves. Secondly, they know their unique female physiology. They know their bodies, they know what their hormones are doing, they know their rhythms, and they know that those things can be leveraged as superpowers and that they're not to be ignored or suppressed. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the bulk of the program, which is finding your flow. And really, that is just understanding what the conditions are for flow. So I've identified through my research and just my own experience 6 primary, like I call them paddles, that are necessary for flow to exist in your life. And once one of those is engaged, you're getting momentum. If you engage 2, 3, or 4 of them, you're really flowing now. And so the idea is you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to execute all of these. Even if you get one paddle moving in the right direction, you can experience this flow. You don't have to wait to have it all together. Then we talk about what it looks like to sustain this flow, which is involving community. We as women do that really well. We do a great job with community. So rather than trying to do it by ourselves, instead of trying to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, we're going to call our friends. We're going to call on our support system, our accountability system. And there's a system in place to incrementally reach the goals or implement the habits. And then finally, we talk about reclaiming your flow, which is essentially what we spent some time talking about today, which is identifying the flow blockers and how to get out of that churn whenever
Yeah.
you find yourself kind of drowning in that churn of water. So that's the program at a high level,
Yeah.
what it looks like. And yeah, it just
Yeah.
I'm excited to be talking about it and implementing it with other women. I've already been
Yeah.
able to do that and it's been helpful. So
So good, my friend. Can you quickly share, like in your opinion, based on your own experience, but maybe and also the conversations you've had with other women or clients, what are typically the flow blockers? Is there a specific theme, a specific place they come from in your life? Is there something that women talk about the most? I'm just curious.
I'll start by saying this. The things that we talked about as far as like the cultural and like the career, the spiritual, all of the things that have impacted our connection with ourselves, those things that have happened, those are what are expressed as flow blockers in women. And so for the like high achieving good girl who follows all the rules and common flow blockers that I've heard women talk about and I've experienced myself are um, the inner critic loop, the perfectionism, the time blindness. I'm blanking on the other ones off the top of my head, but there are a handful of blockers that when women get stuck in them, that's what keeps them in churn and keeps them from finding alignment with who they truly want to be.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate 100% to perfectionism. And I know you and I have talked about this, and I think it's very common for women to want to do a good job or to want to really, show up for their life or show up for their job in a way that expresses excellence, or they really want to nurture other people with intention in a very profound way. So we have this expectation of doing all the things and taking care of all the things, and we want to show up and do it really well. But I love how you're really speaking to how if we get into these loops of perfectionism, or we're being our own worst critic and we're beating ourselves up about things, or we're not prioritizing time or boundaries enough, like we end up just staying stuck. Like you're calling it churn, I'm kind of interpreting as staying stuck.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate to that in business, in motherhood, in life, and even in my health journey, how when you don't recognize that, you really can't get yourself through it. And so I love that your program is about this 5-step process where you're going deeper dive on these different topics and really helping women identify what are the reasons that you maybe are stuck? Why are you not in your unique flow? How do you get back into alignment? And then how do you turn that into a sustainable plan and program that you essentially can follow, for your life? And so it's just wonderful what you're doing, Kara. And I'm so grateful to connect with you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Of course. So before we kind of wrap up, will you quickly share how people can find you, talk a little bit about, getting connected to anything you're doing as a coach, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So people can find me at karakupchella.com. So Kara and then Kupchella, just like it sounds, Kupchella. And that'll take you to my landing page, and you're more than welcome to request a free strategy call. I'd love to talk with you if you want to just kind of hash out and talk out loud about where you want to be. I think we don't give ourselves enough time or credit or just
Yeah.
space to do that. So that would be the purpose of that call. And I would like to help you get set up with a few, at least micro steps to get started in the right direction. And then if we end up working together in a one-on-one capacity, that would be great too. Aside from that, you
Awesome.
can also find me on Instagram at the Fit Dog Mama Kara. And so those are my two main areas of contact.
Awesome. And then we will have everything linked in the show notes of this podcast. So if you want to reach out to Kara, connect with Kara, learn more about the work she's doing, please make sure that you guys are going to the show notes. Kara, thanks again for your incredible knowledge today, my friend. I am so excited for everyone to listen to everything that you shared, learn more about fulfilled flow, and just the importance of really living in connection with yourself. It's just so important for us to do as women.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I know balancing time and energy can be a challenge, and I'm so proud of you for listening in and investing in your wellness journey. I feel incredibly grateful to connect with you and for the opportunity to share more knowledge, stories, and encouragement related to all things wellness. I would love to hear how this podcast has served you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review on either iTunes or Spotify. Your support truly means the world to me and helps me reach more women just like you and me who are looking to transform their health from the inside out. Plus, when you share this episode with a friend, we invite more women in to learn alongside us. What a gift. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we know, the better we can do. For ourselves, for our families, and our future. Well done on taking the step towards a healthier, happier you. Until next week, stay empowered and stay well.